The bathroom, meant for something as simple as a bath, became something else entirely. Lucia found herself backed against the cool surface behind her, her breath uneven as Hugo closed the distance between them. His actions were unrestrained, driven more by feeling than thought. When his hands moved to her dress, she instinctively covered herself, her face warming with confusion. "Hugo," she called softly, unsure whether she was stopping him or simply trying to steady herself. He didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned in again, as if afraid the moment might slip if he hesitated. For a brief second, Lucia resisted, caught between surprise and uncertainty, but that resistance slowly faded. Her hand, once hesitant, found its way to him, resting lightly as she gave in to the moment. Still, a part of her tried to hold on to reason. "The bath you wanted, it's right here," she said, her voice quieter now, steadier. Hugo, flushed and clearly not thinking as far ahead, gave a simple answer, that it didn't make much difference. The logic was questionable, and she knew it. Her eyes lingered on him, measuring the seriousness behind his words, only to realize there wasn't much thought there at all. A small pause followed. Then, with a quiet exhale and a lowered gaze, she relented. "Just this once." What followed was unsteady, less graceful than either of them might have imagined. Lucia quickly found herself overwhelmed, not just by him, but by the unfamiliar intensity of everything. She clung to him for balance, her thoughts scattered as her body struggled to keep up. At one point, her footing nearly gave way. The shift was sudden, but Hugo reacted just as quickly, catching her before she could slip. His voice dropped, quieter now, telling her to hold on to him properly. When she admitted she could barely feel her legs, he adjusted without hesitation, lifting her to keep her steady. The urgency that had driven him at first slowly burned itself out. By the time it ended, the room had gone still again, save for their uneven breathing. Lucia rested against him, her strength spent, while Hugo paused, as if grounding himself in the quiet that followed. For a brief moment, they simply looked at each other, no words, just a shared awareness of what had just passed. Only then did they finally move to the bath. The water softened everything. The tension that had filled the room dissolved into something calmer, quieter. Lucia leaned back slightly, her mind still catching up, her expression distant as if she hadn't fully returned to herself yet. Hugo noticed immediately. "Are you all right?" he asked, his tone no longer impulsive, but careful. She flinched faintly at the question, as though pulled out of her thoughts. Then she nodded, offering a simple reassurance, though her voice carried a trace of lingering uncertainty. As the silence settled again, he reached for her hair, gently brushing it aside before pressing a light kiss against her neck. The gesture was softer than before, more deliberate. It made her think. "Earlier, why did you look at me like that?" she asked, turning slightly to face him. He didn't understand at first. But when he did, his expression shifted. He admitted that he thought she might have been upset because Damien had left. The answer lingered between them. Lucia watched him for a moment, then shook her head gently. There was no sadness in her expression now, only quiet certainty. Damien had simply gone to continue his studies. It was where he was meant to be. She leaned against Hugo as she said it, her tone light, almost reassuring. But even then, Hugo couldn't help his own thoughts. Though part of him was relieved, he knew she had let go of two things at once, Damien, and even the small companion she had grown attached to. It wasn't something easily dismissed. Lucia, however, didn't seem weighed down by it. Instead, she spoke about writing letters, about sending gifts. The idea brought a genuine brightness to her expression. Even if it was only through words, the thought of being called mother still meant something to her. Hugo listened, the tension in him easing without him realizing it. Then, quietly, he leaned in and kissed her again. This time, there was no urgency, only warmth. After the bath, the room settled into a quiet stillness. The candles had burned lower, and the warmth of the bed made it easy to forget everything beyond the walls. Lucia rested against Hugo, her head on his chest, listening to the slow, steady rhythm of his breathing. For a moment, she simply stayed there, but the question lingering in her mind refused to fade. Hugo, there's something about Damien I want to ask you, she said softly, tilting her head up to look at him. His expression shifted almost immediately. Don't talk about another man while we're in bed, he replied, his tone even but firm. Lucia frowned, lifting herself slightly. What do you mean? He's your son. That doesn't change the fact that he's male, Hugo said, his voice carrying a quiet seriousness that made her pause. I suppose that's true, she murmured, her fingers brushing lightly against her lips in thought. But the hesitation didn't last. That doesn't mean we can't talk about him at all. Hugo closed his eyes, as though choosing not to respond. Whether he was ignoring her or simply avoiding the topic, she couldn't tell. The silence stretched, and her thoughts filled the space instead. You said you didn't hate Damien, so why can't you show him even a little warmth? She had tried to understand his nature, his reserved demeanor, his difficulty with expressing affection. But this distance felt deliberate. At times, it almost seemed as though he simply didn't care. Well? What is it? He asked at last, his voice breaking the quiet. Lucia hesitated for a moment before speaking again. Damien is very kind. Respectful, too. It's hard to believe that the two of you are father and son. The thought had crossed her mind more than once. Damien's gentle nature stood in contrast to Hugo's rigid composure. About Damien's birth mother, she continued carefully, watching his face. Has she never said anything about missing him? Hugo's eyes opened at that, a flicker of surprise passing through them. Lucia noticed it immediately. The reaction only deepened her curiosity. Had Damien ever even met his mother since coming to the north? If not, was it because she wanted nothing to do with him? Or was it Hugo who had kept them apart? If neither was true, then wouldn't it be better for them to meet, at least occasionally? A quiet thought followed, one she couldn't ignore. No matter how hard I try, I could never replace a real mother. She's dead, Hugo said calmly. The words landed with a weight that silenced her. Oh, Lucia's gaze lowered briefly before returning to him. Is that why you brought Damien here? You could say that, he replied. She sat up slightly, studying his expression. Damien is very handsome. I imagine his mother must have been beautiful as well. Hugo's response came without thought. I wouldn't know. I've never met her. Lucia froze. What? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Hugo's expression tightened almost immediately, as though he had realized too late what he'd said. I shouldn't have said that. Vivian, he began, reaching for her hand, his voice softer now. But Lucia pulled away slightly, her brows drawn together in confusion. Is it that difficult to explain? He didn't answer. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. After a moment, Lucia turned her back to him. Fine, then. She lay down again, facing away, her eyes open despite the darkness. Hugo closed his eyes briefly, uncertain how to respond. For once, even he seemed at a loss. Behind him, Lucia's thoughts refused to settle. If he had said he didn't remember, I wouldn't have asked any further. But this didn't make sense. How could someone have a child with a person they had never even met? Her fingers tightened slightly around the sheets. Damien's face came to mind, his features so clearly resembling Hugo's that there was no room for doubt. Was it just once? A single encounter that meant so little he couldn't even recall her face? Even so, she was the mother of his child. To speak as if she were nothing. The thought unsettled her. Does he think that any woman who leaves his life becomes meaningless, even if she bore his child? A quieter, more personal question followed. Then what about me? Her chest tightened slightly. One day, will it be as if I never existed to him either? One day, I suppose it'll be as if you never met me as well, she said softly. Hugo's eyes opened at once. Where did you get that idea? He asked, moving closer and wrapping an arm around her from behind. You can't even remember the mother of your own child, Lucia replied, her voice steady but distant. That's not it, he said, though the words lacked explanation. Lucia closed her eyes. She had told herself many times to be patient. Loving him would not be easy, she had known that from the beginning. If she wanted to continue, she would have to move forward slowly, without expectation. But each time she was faced with his indifference, that resolve weakened. It became harder to believe she could ever reach him. She had first felt it when she saw how distant he was with Damien. Even knowing, deep down, that he cared, his actions rarely showed it. There had been a time she even questioned whether he was capable of affection at all. And yet, he treated her differently. He didn't seem to dislike her. If anything, there were moments when he appeared almost gentle, even attentive. But that wasn't the same as love. It isn't love. And still, at times, he behaved as though it were. As though he were testing something, or waiting for something. The thought irritated her more than she expected. She opened her eyes, frustration rising, and suddenly pushed herself up. Then what did you mean? She demanded, turning to face him. How can someone have your child if you've never even met them? Vivian, he began, but she didn't stop. Times must have changed, she continued sharply. It's possible now, is it? To have a child without ever seeing each other? I think you're more upset than necessary, Hugo said, his voice tense. Oh, forgive me, she replied quickly. How careless of me to feel upset. Vivian, he said again, leaning forward. She fell silent then, her gaze fixed on him, waiting. For a brief moment, Hugo said nothing. Then, carefully, as though choosing each word. Damien is, he paused, his expression steady but restrained. He's not my real son. Lucia stared at him, stunned. What? Damien is not, Hugo says. Lucia pauses, her hand rising instinctively to her mouth. The answer unsettles her more than she expected. For a moment, she simply looks at him, trying to understand what he means. Then, he's not your son? She asks carefully. There is a brief silence before Hugo speaks again. I heard you asked Jerome about what happened in the West Tower, he says. I assume he told you I had a brother. Lucia nods. He did. Hugo exhales quietly, then continues in an even tone. Damien is my brother's child. That makes him my nephew. The words land heavily. Lucia's gaze shifts, her expression tightening as the truth settles in. Her heart begins to beat faster. Damien, she says, almost under her breath. Then, more directly, does he know? He doesn't, Hugo replies. No one does. Just me, and now you. He does not say the rest aloud, but his thoughts briefly turn to the old physician, Sir Philip, who is also aware of the truth. Lucia hesitates before asking, do you plan to tell him someday? Hugo doesn't answer immediately. When he does, his voice is calm but distant. I would rather not. Unless he asks. I see, she murmurs. Her thoughts begin to shift. If Damien is Hugo's nephew, then he was never illegitimate to begin with. There was never any real reason for him to be treated as such. But another thought follows just as quickly. Perhaps it is better this way. Being called illegitimate may be kinder than being known as the son of a man who killed his own parents. She lowers her gaze slightly, absorbing the weight of that possibility. Hugo watches her for a moment before speaking again. I know what you heard about the tower, he says. But what happened there isn't as simple as it sounds. My brother was cornered. He didn't have many options. The former Duke bears part of the responsibility for what happened. Lucia listens quietly, studying his expression. The way he speaks about his brother feels different from what she expected. There is no distance in it, no bitterness. If anything, there is familiarity, something closer to understanding. She had heard stories before. That his twin brother had sought revenge after being abandoned at birth. That the two had no real bond. But this doesn't match that version at all. They knew each other, she realizes. They were not strangers. For some reason, that thought brings her a small sense of relief. She had always imagined Hugo growing up alone, with no one beside him. Knowing that wasn't entirely true eases something in her. You must have been close to him, she says after a moment. Hugo closes his eyes briefly before answering. I was. Very close? Yes. Lucia nods slowly. That's why you raised Damien as your own, she says. Because he's all that's left of your brother. Hugo hesitates. That's not exactly it, he says. Then, after a pause, or maybe it is. There's a lot surrounding Damien that I can't explain. Not because I want to hide it from you. I just don't want to speak about it at all. His hands tighten slightly against the bed. There's a faint tremor in them. I don't ever want to talk about it, he adds quietly. These things should end with me. Lucia watches him for a moment, then gently places her hand over his. The contact makes him open his eyes in surprise. They look at each other in silence. It's all right, she says softly. What you've told me is enough. Her expression remains calm, her voice steady. Everyone has things they can't share, she continues. Even with people they care about. Her thoughts drift inward. There are things in her own life, memories, fears, experiences, that she has never spoken about and never intends to. If telling it brings you pain, she says, then you don't have to say anything. Hugo's expression shifts, touched but conflicted. But if I keep everything from you, that might hurt you, he says. Lucia shakes her head slightly. Then if that time comes, I'll ask you, she replies. And you can decide then whether you want to tell me or not. He looks at her, surprised by the simplicity of her answer. After a moment, he nods. All right. A faint smile appears on his face. Lucia reaches up and gently cups his face. He leans into her touch, and soon after, pulls her into an embrace, holding her firmly but without force. Within that quiet moment, Lucia speaks again. Damien is our son, she says. That won't change, will it? It won't, Hugo replies. She rests against him before asking one more question. His parents, did they love each other? I've heard that they did, Hugo answers. Lucia nods. Then when he's older, I think you should tell him. He'll understand. And it would be better for him to know. Hugo doesn't respond right away, but eventually gives a small nod. All right. For a brief moment, his thoughts turn elsewhere. If he has children of his own, would everything repeat itself? The past, the violence, the same outcomes, it is something he cannot completely dismiss. Lucia senses that fear, even if he doesn't voice it directly. In a way, she understands. She remembers the fear that once drove her to make choices about her own future, choices rooted in uncertainty and the desire to avoid suffering. And yet, things have changed. Now, as she rests in his arms, her thoughts settle with quiet clarity. She may not have given birth to Damien, but that does not change what he is to her. He is her child. And as she remains there, held securely in Hugo's embrace, she accepts that truth without hesitation. Duke Hugo's thoughts drifted back to a distant memory, one of the earliest moments he shared with his brother. They had been children then, lying in the grass beneath an open sky. We really do look alike, his brother had said with bright enthusiasm. Even our names sound the same, Hugh. I'm Hugo. It's Hugh, not Hugh. Stupid, he replied flatly, not even turning his head, his gaze still fixed upward. Hugh, see? It sounds the same when you say it quickly, his brother insisted with a small laugh. You don't even know what my name means, he had muttered. Then what does it mean? His brother asked, undeterred. The memory faded as Hugo returned to the present, still within Lucia's embrace. Lucia remained close to him, but her thoughts were unsettled. Why am I so selfish? She wondered. Until recently, she had believed Damien was Hugo's son. Even after learning the truth that Damien was his brother's child, her feelings toward the boy hadn't changed. Yet what stood out to her most was not sympathy for Damien's circumstances, but relief. Relief that Hugo had not fathered a child with another woman. The realization left her uneasy with herself. No wonder I felt like Damien wasn't entirely like you, she said at last, gently pulling away from him. I thought you said he was exactly like me, Hugo replied, a hint of confusion crossing his face. In appearance, yes, she clarified. But your personalities are completely different. Damien is kind, gentle. I wouldn't describe you that way. A faint grin formed on his lips. I'm kind to you, aren't I? He pulled her closer, lifting her slightly as though to emphasize his point. Lucia's face flushed at the sudden movement. What do you mean? She asked, though her voice carried more curiosity than protest. I mean exactly that, he said simply, leaning in to kiss her. She let out a soft laugh. Why are you laughing? He asked. It tickles, she replied, still smiling as he lowered her back onto the bed and leaned over her. After a brief pause, Lucia studied his face again, her tone turning thoughtful. Since Damien resembles you so closely, your brother must have been your identical twin. It's fascinating, the idea that there were two of you. There weren't, Hugo said, almost dismissively. He may have looked like me, but he was nothing like me. He was softer. Less assertive. Lucia watched him quietly, her expression softening. So he was kinder, she thought. That must be where Damien gets it from. May I ask what your brother's name was? She asked gently. For a moment, Hugo froze. The question, simple as it was, carried weight. He had taken his brother's name as his own. The truth sat just beneath the surface, but he did not speak it. You don't have to answer if you'd rather not, Lucia added when he remained silent. He hesitated, then answered, Hugh. Her eyes widened slightly. Oh, so his name was the same as yours. How is it the same? He asked. Hugh, it sounds identical when you say it quickly, she said with a light laugh. Hugo stared at her, momentarily caught off guard. The words echoed something his brother had once said, long ago in that field under the sky. Lucia smiled, unaware of the weight behind her observation. It's almost like the two of you were always meant to stay close, even through your names. He said nothing at first, only pulling her into a quiet embrace. Vivian, he called softly. Yes, she answered. Vivian. Yes, she repeated, this time with a brighter smile. As he held her, a quiet realization settled in his mind. I could not live without her. The thought came without resistance. For the first time, he felt that his heart no longer belonged solely to him. Each beat carried a dull ache, but it was not unpleasant. The following morning, the atmosphere shifted back to duty. Elliot entered with a stack of documents. These are the reports concerning the false disease outbreak caused by the poisonous mushrooms. Hugo read through them in silence. The contaminated mushrooms had been collected and destroyed. The individual responsible had admitted negligence and was penalized with a heavy fine. Any other affected villages? Hugo asked. None beyond the initial two, Elliot replied. We've traced the distribution routes. There shouldn't be further spread. Hugo nodded slightly. It seemed the matter was nearing its conclusion. He reached for the petition to finalize the case, but paused when a name caught his attention. Wales, he repeated, his tone sharpening. The proprietor is Count Wales? Yes, Your Grace. Hugo leaned back slightly, his expression unreadable. By law, the identity of the proprietor should not influence the case. Commercial regulations applied equally, regardless of status. That was the principle. Still, the name stirred something deeper. He remembered Lucia's tears, how she had broken down, unable to hide her pain. He had felt anger then, a sharp and immediate urge to act. But she had asked him not to intervene, and he had respected her wishes. That restraint had not erased his resentment. "This isn't something we can overlook," he said at last. Elliot straightened slightly. "How would you like to proceed?" "I can't shake the feeling that this wasn't just negligence," Hugo replied, tapping his finger lightly against the desk. "I want a full investigation. Their business records, their taxes, everything." Elliot hesitated. "By full investigation, do you mean?" "I want you to examine every detail," Hugo said, his tone calm but firm. "Leave nothing unchecked." "Understood, Your Grace." Elliot bowed before taking his leave. As he stepped out, a quiet thought crossed his mind. The Duke was not known for kindness, nor for letting matters go once they had caught his attention. He might appear indifferent most of the time, but when something did provoke him, his persistence was difficult to withstand. Left alone in his office, Hugo rested his hands against the desk, his thoughts steady. Whatever lay beneath the surface of this incident, he intended to uncover it. One afternoon, Lucia sat down for tea with Kate, the atmosphere calm and familiar. As always, the tea prepared by Jerome drew praise. "The tea Jerome brews is always so fragrant," Kate remarked, clearly enjoying herself. "I couldn't agree more." "It's delicious every time," Lucia replied with an easy smile. After a brief pause, Kate leaned forward slightly. "How was your recent tea party? Did everything go well?" "Yes, it did." "You're always so considerate to ask," Lucia answered, her tone warm but composed. In truth, Lucia had only recently begun returning to high society after taking time for herself. Her reappearance had not gone unnoticed. By the time her third tea party was announced, the nobles of the north were in a quiet frenzy, each trying to secure a place on the guest list. Beneath that eagerness, however, lay unease. Rumors had spread about the Duke's actions in the rebel regions, stories of harsh punishment, of entire households wiped out. Whether exaggerated or not, they were enough to instill fear. The nobles, uncertain of where they stood, became increasingly cautious. The situation had only grown more tense after the incident at Lucia's garden party. What began as a social gathering had ended poorly, and the Duke had taken the matter seriously. All the noblemen were summoned and sharply reprimanded for the conduct shown toward his wife. News of that meeting circulated quickly. Kate had heard the details from her father and had been deeply unsettled. The Turin family had always remained distant from the northern aristocracy. Though the Duke ruled over them, he had never made an effort to build close ties. To many, he was a remote figure, present in authority, but absent in familiarity. Even during his time at war, few had shown genuine concern for his well-being. That distance made his recent actions all the more striking. For the first time, the nobles were forced to confront not just his authority, but the extent of his power. Naturally, they began trying to interpret his intentions, hoping to secure some measure of safety. And in all of this, the one person they could approach was Lucia. As a result, many noble women were encouraged, sometimes subtly pressured, by their families to attend her gatherings. If they could not reach the Duke directly, they would try to understand him through his wife. Yet Lucia herself remained largely untouched by the undercurrent of tension surrounding her. Kate, however, was fully aware of it. "I may be the only one who can explain what's really happening," she thought quietly. But is it necessary to worry her when nothing has changed on the surface? Before she could decide, Lucia spoke again, her expression thoughtful. "Now that I think about it, that day felt a bit odd." "Odd? What do you mean?" Kate asked, masking her curiosity. Lucia paused, choosing her words carefully. "Even though it was my third tea party, the guests behaved differently. There seemed to be two distinct groups, those who attended the garden party, and those who didn't." Kate remained silent, listening closely. The ones who were there that day, their expressions were difficult to read. They didn't seem unwilling to attend, but they looked uneasy. Almost as if they felt both grateful and apologetic at the same time. She lowered her gaze slightly, reflecting. I never spoke about what happened at the garden party. I didn't want to make anyone uncomfortable. And I understand that those of lower rank can't refuse an invitation from someone in my position. So I had no intention of criticizing them. She continued, her tone steady. But some of them were overly cautious when speaking to me. It felt excessive. And the others? Kate prompted. Those who didn't attend acted differently. They spoke more freely, especially about Damien. In fact, they made a point of referring to him with great respect. Lucia gave a small, thoughtful smile. At first, I assumed it was because Hugh officially registered Damien into the family. It seemed like a natural change. Kate held her composure, though her thoughts were far less calm. It's not that simple, she wanted to say. They're afraid of your husband. But she restrained herself. I'm sure it's nothing, she said instead, offering a reassuring smile. You shouldn't worry about it. Lucia nodded lightly. You're right. Kate studied her for a moment, then allowed herself a faint grin. At the very least, no one will dare act carelessly toward her again. Kate, why are you smiling like that? Lucia asked, slightly puzzled. It's nothing, Kate replied smoothly. That evening, Lucia received a letter from Damien. The moment she recognized the handwriting, her expression softened. It had been a month and a half since he left for the academy. She had written to him immediately after his departure, and his first reply had come 20 days later. Now, holding the new letter in her hands, she sat down without hesitation. He's written quite a lot again, she thought, noticing the length. As she read, the letter unfolded like a detailed account of his daily life. He described his classes, the people he had spoken to, and even small, seemingly insignificant moments. The way he wrote made it easy for her to picture everything clearly. It felt less like reading a letter and more like quietly observing his days from afar. The final lines were simple. The weather has gotten colder. Please take care to keep warm. Cordially, Damien. Lucia let out a quiet breath. I'm glad he's doing well, she said to herself. As she carefully folded the letter, another thought came to mind. It's almost the end of the year. I should start preparing his gift. There was a hint of determination in her voice now. I'll do my best this time. Her thoughts were interrupted by a maid entering the room. Your Grace, you have a guest. At this hour? Lucia asked, surprised. Later that night, she brought the matter up with Duke Hugo. Hugh, there's something I want to ask you, she said. What is it? He replied. Do you remember the promise you made? About not getting involved in what happened at the garden party? I remember, he answered calmly. Inwardly, however, his thoughts were less straightforward. There's nothing wrong with advising my vassals to keep their households in order, he reasoned. Lucia watched him closely. You meant it, didn't you? Of course. She hesitated briefly. Then, the talk I heard must have been false. He frowned slightly. What talk? That question brought her back to the unexpected visit earlier that evening. Countess Wales had arrived without prior notice. Lucia had not recognized her at first. The woman appeared noticeably thinner than expected, her presence subdued. After a brief introduction, Lucia spoke plainly. To be honest, I cannot say I welcome this visit. That day was my first time hosting so many guests, and it ended poorly. Wouldn't you agree that you bear some responsibility? The Countess had not resisted. I do. I sincerely apologize, she said, her tone subdued. The ease of her admission had felt unusual. This isn't what I expected, Lucia had thought at the time. When the Countess confirmed that her visit was solely to apologize, Lucia accepted it, but made it clear she did not wish to continue the conversation. However, just as she stood to leave, the Countess stopped her. There is one thing I would like to ask. Lucia's expression hardened. I thought you came to apologize, not to ask for favors. You misunderstand, the Countess said quickly. I only ask that you ease your anger. The request itself was confusing, but the explanation that followed made the intent clearer. The Countess spoke at length about the difficulties facing her family's guild. Though much of it sounded like justification, the underlying concern was obvious: they feared the Duke's judgment. Lucia's response had been firm. If your guild has committed wrongdoing, it will be handled accordingly. His Grace will decide based on the law. To bring personal matters into this is inappropriate. The Countess had immediately denied any such implication, but her plea remained the same. She asked for leniency, acknowledging the Duke's strict nature. After recounting the visit, Lucia looked at Hugo carefully. She seemed to believe you might act against them because of what happened at the party. Hugo's expression stilled for a moment. That's not possible, Lucia continued. You wouldn't mix personal matters with official duties, right? Of course not, he replied, though his tone carried a slight tension. In the end, after a thorough investigation, the Wales family was allowed to continue their business. They still paid the appropriate fines, but no additional punishment was imposed. Relieved, they expressed nothing but gratitude. But the conclusion others drew from the situation was different. Among the nobles of the North, a new belief quietly took hold that the Duke was particularly attentive when it came to his wife. When Kate later heard how the story had spread, she couldn't help but laugh to herself. Of course it ended up like this. As we reach the end of Season 2, we just want to take a moment to sincerely thank every one of you for following along on this journey. Your support, engagement, and love for this story truly mean more than words can express. Whether you've been here from the very beginning or joined along the way, you've made this experience incredibly rewarding for us. Bringing these recaps to life and sharing such a compelling story with you has been nothing short of amazing, and it's your continued support that keeps us motivated to do even better. We deeply appreciate every view, comment, and share. You've helped build something special here. And don't worry, we're not stopping anytime soon. We promise to keep delivering more engaging and high-quality manhwa recaps for you. So stay tuned, because the final season is on the way, and it's coming soon.
Thank you for watching this episode of our manhwa recap. We hope you enjoyed diving into the world of this story with us. If you loved the content, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. Your support means the world to us and helps us bring you even more amazing manhwa recaps. See you in the next episode.